Well, Mr. Halberstein, it's lovely
Alex is my name.
It's lovely to have you here in our beautiful Judaica library.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And perhaps we can start just by you telling us your full name and where you were born and when you were born.
Okay. My full name is Alex Halberstein Weinraub, Weinraub being my mother's maiden name. I was born in Vienna, Austria. Do I have to say when?
Okay. That would be nice.
October 28, 1933.
Wonderful.
My parents, both, father was Isaac, my mother was Clara. They were actually born in Austria when they were born, but when they were born, it was Austria, like I say, that was before World War I. But now it would be, my father would be in a town in Poland called Nowy Sącz, and my mother would have been born in a town called Kopychinsky in the Ukraine. And that was a result of the split up of the Austrian-Hungary Empire, which happened after the end of World War I.
Right. What was your father's profession?
Well, my father had several professions, but the main one, the most important one, and that saved our lives, was my father was a professional soccer player. Back in Austria in the 1920s, there were a lot of important professional sports clubs, but they were not allowed for Jews. Jews could not be part of it. Therefore, a large group of wealthy Jews decided to create a Jewish-only professional sports club, which was called and is still in activity by the name of Hanoar Wien. My father played soccer, and so he was a professional soccer player. In 1926, the Hanoar Wien became the Austrian only ever European champion. And as a result of that, they went on a tour of America. They played in the United States and they played in Latin America. Among the countries that they played in as exhibition games was Peru. So they played 2 games in Peru, and apparently my father was viewed by the Peruvian soccer authorities as a good player. So they approached my father and asked him if he would be interested in staying in Peru for 2 years as the coach for the Peruvian Olympic game that was preparing itself for the Olympics of back then. And he accepted. He was then given a Peruvian passport because being the coach of the country, he had to be a national of Peru. So he accepted that also. My father worked for the Olympic Committee for 2 years. And after 2 years, of course, they didn't win the Olympics. But after 2 years, his contract was up, and he decided to stay another 2 years in Peru, but not in Lima, which is the capital of Peru. And he went to a northern, am I going too fast? To a city called Trujillo, which is about 500 kilometers north of Lima, where most of the Jews that had originally emigrated to Peru lived. And he worked there for 2 years, and he saved some money. In 1930, my father decided that it was time to go back to Austria. He went back to Austria, and with the money that he had saved, he started a jewelry store. And that's when he got into the jewelry business, which was something new for him because, like I say, he had been a sports person.
Right. At what point did he meet your mother?
Okay, I don't know when they met.
Right.
I know when they got married.
Okay.
They were married in 1932 in Vienna. And when my father and my mother were married, the Hitler organization, the Nazi organization, was already making waves in Germany, and they were looking at Austria as the next, what they call the Anschluss. So my father very wisely took my mother to the Peruvian consulate and got her a Peruvian passport because she was entitled to it, having been married to a Peruvian citizen.
Right.
As I said at the beginning, I was born in 1933. So therefore, having been born to Peruvian nationals in a foreign country, I was entitled to a Peruvian passport, and I got a Peruvian passport. That saved our lives.
That's an amazing story. Did you have siblings?
I'm sorry?
Do you have siblings?
No, I'm an only son.
Child. Right. Wonderful. What about your mother's family history?
My mother had a brother, father and mother, obviously, and an uncle with several nephew nieces. My mother's uncle, when Hitler took over, he and his wife emigrated over the mountains to Switzerland. And they spent the entire war in a refugee camp, separated, men and women separated. After the war was over, and this was in 1946, they came to Peru because we were already in Peru, and my father was able to bring them back. My father's parents were lost during the war, as well as 5 brothers and sisters of my father.
That's terrible. When they were in Peru, did your father continue his profession as a...
No, well, I should tell you something else. While we were in Austria, and right after the Anschluss had happened, my father still had the jewelry store because we emigrated in 1938 to Peru.
Right.
My father had already had the jewelry store, and he was buying and selling. But he had the foresight of deciding to save some money for whatever would come in the future. The Nazis put into the store of my father a person who was supposed to watch over what my father did while the store was open. My father very wisely made an arrangement with this fellow, and he got a tip, let's call it that way, and so his eyes were closed. Every 2 weeks, my mother took a train from Vienna to Zurich and took with her some of the merchandise, jewelry, and some of the money, and put it away. So when we arrived in Peru in 1938, my father and my mother and I, when we left, we left penniless.
Right.
But being in Peru, they were able to recover all of the savings that they had saved over the years that helped my father start in business.
Right. God. How did they adapt to life in Peru? I know your father had already been there. What about your mother, you? How did it feel?
Okay, my mother, I should say, we also brought with us my mother's mother, my grandmother.
Right.
We rented a house, and within 2 or 3 blocks of the house we rented, there was a grocery store for sale. And my father obviously had never had any experience in groceries, but he felt that that was something that he could start at. So he bought the grocery store, which also had I don't know the English word, carnicerías in Spanish, a meat store, and a fruit and vegetable store. And so he would be able to walk 2 or 3 blocks from where we were living into the store, and my mother and my father worked there, and my grandmother actually raised me. So when we came to Peru, I was about 5 years old, and when I turned 6, they put me in a school where I started learning Spanish because I only spoke German, right. And my grandmother, who, like I say, raised me, spoke with me all the time in German. Right. So now I understand a little bit of German, right. But I'm an analphabet. I don't know how to write or read.
It was German, not Yiddish, then?
No.
No Yiddish.
My father and my mother knew Yiddish, but they didn't speak Yiddish.
Right.
They understood it, but,
right.
You know, knowing German helps you understand a little bit of Yiddish.
Yes, absolutely. What are your recollections of the Jewish community in Lima? How was the community structured, and was it cohesive?
Are you asking me back in 38 or asking me when I was grown up already?
I guess from when you can remember, and then maybe through to...
When I was a kid, obviously, I had very little knowledge or contact with the Jewish community.
Right.
But I went to a school which was called Anglo-Peruano, and when we had our first revolution in Peru, one of the requirements of the military government was that you couldn't have foreign names of schools, so it was renamed San Andres, St. Andrews. This was the only boys' school that was not a religious school, neither Catholic nor Protestant. The girls went to another school, which at the time was called Lima High School, and because of the revolution decree, it was changed to the name of Maria Alvarado. So the boys went to San Andres, and the girls went to Lima Alvarado. And we mingled, but not in school. So I graduated in 1949, and I applied for to go to the University of, well, it wasn't called the university at the time. It was called School of Engineering, which later became the University of Engineering, and I was accepted. But it was very difficult to get in because there was a limited amount of students that they accepted, more or less what happens in Gainesville now.
Right.
So my parents, as a reward, because I studied hard to get in, said, you know, you've been accepted, you can go to school here, or if you want to, we will sacrifice and you can go to the United States. So of course I had learned English because the San Andres the original name of the high school was run by Scottish people. So one of the main languages that they taught, actually the only language that they taught, was English. So I said, okay, I'll go to the United States. So I sent out for applications to, I don't know, 20 or 30 different universities. And back then, the entrance examination was not as hard as it is now. It was very easy to get in. And the one that sent me a brochure with snow was the University of Colorado in Boulder. So I chose to go to the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I went in early 1950.
My goodness, that's wonderful.
Now, you have to remember, in Austria there was snow. Right. But I left when I was 4.5 years old, so I couldn't actually remember. I remember because my grandmother, used to tell me tales and stories about how the life was in Austria, right, which I still remember a little bit. But actually, truthfully, I did not remember. Right. So snow impressed me. And the brochure was so nice that I went to University of Colorado.
That makes sense. Well, nowadays, students travel everywhere to go to university, but back then, maybe not so much. So that was quite an adventure. How did it feel?
To begin with, my parents didn't want me to go alone.
Right.
And you have to remember, this is 1950, so transportation was not as easy as it is now. So my mother decided to go with me.
Right.
So we took a ship, and we left Peru through Callao, which is the main port of the city of Lima, and we traveled to Havana, Cuba. And we were supposed to go over to Miami from Havana, Cuba, but a hurricane happened in that period of time, so we had to stay in Havana for 2 weeks. So those very, very nice 2 weeks during that time of my life. With my mother, we saw shows, we were this, the other. And then when the hurricane had passed, we took an overnight ferry boat that at the time serviced Miami with Havana, and we came to Miami. Right. In Miami, we took a train, which was called the Denver Sapphire. And it took us all the way to Denver, and from Denver, we took a car and took us to Boulder, where the University of Colorado is located.
And what did you think?
My mother stayed with me for about 2 weeks until I was settled in my dorm and everything else, and she went back to Peru.
Right. And what did you think of snow when you finally saw it?
I loved it. I loved it. But I was there 4 years and I never went skiing. Now, in my later life, I went skiing, but while I was there, when it was available to me like every day, never bothered about skiing.
After your studies, you wanted to return to Peru?
I studied 4 years at the University of Colorado. During that time, I had the opportunity to go one time back to Lima for vacation. It was not easy to go back then. You had to take one airline. I remember it was Braniff Airlines, but you had to stop on the way. It wasn't, transportation wasn't not the way it is now. It was very expensive. Yeah. So I went on one vacation for about 2 or 3 weeks to Lima, get back. So after I graduated, I went back to Lima, and I started looking for a job. Right. I had a degree in, I should tell you this other thing. I entered as a candidate for civil engineering. Back then, the studies were in quarters, not in semesters. So during the first quarter, part of the curriculum that you had was drawing, because an engineer needs to draw. Right. I couldn't draw a tree. And I had very, very difficult time with chemistry and with physics. So I wasn't doing well. Right. So one of the advisors suggested that I take a test to determine what my qualification for this or that or the other were. And as a result of that test, I changed my major to industrial engineering and business administration. And I ended up with business administration. So when I graduated, I had a title of business administration. So back in Lima, I said, well, I'm here from the United States, and I'm going to be, very, very, very desirable. It wasn't that way.
Right.
I applied to tons of jobs.
Right.
Couldn't get in. But a friend of mine, who had been my friend while I was in college, in high school yet, and who remained a friend of mine, and his name was Jose Tamayo. He had graduated in Cornell, which was a better-known university than the University of Colorado.
Right.
And he was working for a oil company, which was the International Petroleum Company, which was a subsidiary of Standard Oil of New Jersey. And back then, what is now called Exxon was called ESSO, E-S-S-O. And he worked in the oil fields in the northern part of Peru in a city called Talara. He was the one who got me a job there in the accounting department. Now, why the accounting department? Because back when I was studying, you had to have a major and a minor. My minor was in accounting, so I was able to get that job.
Right.
So in 1950, I don't remember when, September, October, I think, I moved to Talara, which was about 1,200, 1,300 kilometers north of Lima, where all the oil fields were, and I started working there.
That's wonderful. And when did you meet your wife?
Okay, the ESSO, Standard Oil New Jersey, had one of these old B-22 planes for the service of the employees.
Right.
But the employees had to be mostly American because it was an American company. Because of my English and because I was a U.S. graduate, although I was a Peruvian citizen, I was allowed to take trips on that plane.
Right.
So I had the opportunity, like every 2 months, to go back to Lima for about 2, 3, 4 days. One of the trips, I was at my parents' home, and I got a call from a friend of mine in the evening saying, would you like to go to the movies? And this was a very dear friend of mine who had been my friend through high school. And I said, sure. And he had a brother and 3 sisters. So he came to pick me up. He had an automobile, which was very, 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 very unusual among kids in the 1950s. In our age, 20, 21, we didn't have automobiles, right. But he had one. Oh. So he comes to pick me up to my home, and when I get into the car, I see a girl sitting next to him, and one of his sisters sitting in the back. So of course I got into the back, and I said to myself, maybe he's trying to set me up with his sister. We went to the movies, and he sat on the left. The girl who I hadn't met until then next to him on the right, next to him his sister, and I was here. And all of a sudden, I see him snoring. And he was really snoring. And the girl sitting next to him was a little uncomfortable. And at that time, I decided in my mind, can't be his girlfriend, because if it were his girlfriend, he wouldn't be snoring. So 2 days later, I asked her out, and we went to have coffee or something, and that was the beginning of the romance.
Wonderful. And her name?
Her name was Elsie.
Elsie.
Her parents were, her mother was a Peruvian lady, right. And her father was a immigrant from Istanbul, right. Who had emigrated to Peru also in the 1920s. Strangely enough, when my father had been working for 2 years after the football stint in Trujillo, he had met this gentleman who he had never seen before afterwards. Happened to be her father.
Oh, what a coincidence. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. And you had children?
We had 5 children. Mm-hmm. My oldest son you just met, Eddie. Then my second son is named Daniel. Then I have another daughter by the name of Jennifer. The 4th one is Cecilia. And the 5th one you just met is Ariela.
Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. And you said that you didn't have much connection with the Jewish community. Did that
Well,
grow?
I did not have much connection with the Jewish community until such time as I came back from college.
Right.
And I lived in Talara for about a year. And then my wife got pregnant. And also it coincided with a disability I developed in one of my eyes. And the treatment for my disability was not available in Talara. It was a small town which for oil drilling.
Right.
And I had to go to Lima. And my father and mother didn't want their first grandchild to be away. So between the two situations, I moved to Lima. The Standard Oil New Jersey had no job for me in Lima, so I started working elsewhere. And that's where my son Eddie, who you just met, was born.
Right.
Now, when that happened, I started among my friends who had been there all this time that I had been away, had, made inroads into the Jewish community, and having been their friend before I had left, I started getting involved in the Jewish community.
Right.
The Jewish community in Lima back then were about 10,000 Jews, maybe 2,500, 2,600 families, and most of them well-to-do, but not absolutely all of them, but it was a well-to-do community which had, nice homes and had a good life.
Yes. Had many of them come from Europe originally?
Well, all the original forefathers had come from Europe.
Right.
I mean, like my how do you say, my age, most of them were born in Peru. I was maybe one of the few that had immigrated already from Europe, but most of the other children of my age had been born in Peru, in Lima.
Right. Did you witness any discrimination as a Jew in
The
Peru?
discrimination was constant.
Right.
It was in the newspapers, it was in the government, it was in the higher social life, in the clubs. It was nothing different than what it had been in Europe. Like I said, that why my father eventually became a football player and so on. But I'll give you an example. There was a golf course in the city of Lima, beautiful golf course. Jews couldn't play in it because you had to be a member and it was discriminated. So there was another golf course. Golf was about 2 hours away by car. So that's where the Jews played.
Oh my goodness.
In business, it wasn't that bad, but socially, it was very, very remarked. But it wasn't just the Jews, it was also the Italians. There was a large immigration of Italians in Peru. Christians, mostly Catholic, and they were also discriminated.
That's very interesting. Did it change over time, or is it continue as?
Right now, it's not that way. Right now, it's much more liberal.
Right.
Much more liberal. But it took quite a few years to get there.
I don't know how fast forward I'm going in time, but of course, eventually you left Peru. What period was that and why?
Well, I had a good life in Peru. I started with the help of my father I didn't start it actually, I bought a bankrupt tin can factory. Back then everything was packed in tin cans, not like now plastic and such. And I was successful. And I grew in that business. I learned first, then I grew the business. Then I got into a partnership with another tin can manufacturing company, and we built a third tin can manufacturing plant where we now, instead of building tin cans of different sizes in one place, we build tin cans in a specific factory, one size, of another factory, another size, because of course the market was growing and there was more demand. So that was doing very well. I also got involved with some friends of mine into a partnership in a fish meal factory. Fish meal was one of the main exports of Peru because of the facility that you have in the coast of Peru. There is a current, water current called the Humboldt Current, which was named after a Mr. Humboldt who discovered it, and it's cold water. And since we are in the Pacific where the water is a little warm, that was conducive to the anchovy, but not the anchovy that you eat in sardines. Right. The anchovy is about 10 inches long, that was fished, cooked, grinded into fish meal. And it turned out that fish meal became eventually the #1 export of Peru for many, many years.
That's incredible.
So these friends of mine and I bought an ongoing fish meal factory. So I had the 3 tin can manufacturing plants going with Peruvian partners and the fish meal factory going on at the same time. And also before I left Peru, I got involved into a liquor manufacturing plant where we had the license of Cinzano and Gilbey's. So because Peru prohibited import of foreign liquors, we could, with a license of them, produce Gilbey's and Cinzano, and it was doing very well.
Very well.
So I had no plans of leaving the country. My 5 children had been born there, they had gone to school, and they were in, 2 boys were in high school, and the 3 girls were in grammar school. But then in 1968, we had a very, very strong military communist revolution based on the Cuban situation that started in 1959, 1960. And we had the infiltration of a lot of Cuban political people who infiltrated, among others, the schools.
Right.
One night, and for me, it was very important. One night, my daughter Jennifer, the 3rd daughter, comes home from school about one afternoon, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and she was crying, and you couldn't stop her from crying. And her mother and I, what's happened? What happened? She finally said that she was very confused because the teacher had told the class that we, the people in industry and the people in business, were bloodsuckers, and that we were sucking the blood of the people locally and moving all of our money to Europe, to Switzerland, and destroying the economy of the country. And she couldn't understand it because she says, I know what my father does. My father is very good to the workers. I used to treat the workers the way they're supposed to be treated. I gave them vacations during Christmas. I gave them vacations during Christian holidays. I had a nursery in each one of the factories where the mothers who had children that worked could bring their children in the morning and be taken care of and go with their children back. So my kids knew about this because I made them participate. So she couldn't understand. She was very concerned. So, and she was told by the teacher not to tell her parents. And that's why she was crying. Until we got her to talk, it took a while. So that evening I called the president of the Jewish school, which was called Leon Pinello, where my children were going to school, and I said, I need to talk to you, it's very urgent. So he came to my house at night. We'd never talked on the telephone. I mean, since the revolution started, phone was not used for anything other than how are you, how are you feeling?
Right.
And let me tell you this, they had people listening on the phone that spoke Yiddish. So if you thought that you're going to get away with speaking something in Yiddish, it didn't happen. They recorded it and you got in trouble. And we knew that. So he came to the house and I asked her to tell him what she had told us. And he called his wife and said, would you like to come over? And I also should tell you that the Jewish community, we were like a ghetto. We all lived around the school.
Right.
So she came over with her son, who was a young boy going to school with my daughter, because Leon Pinello, the Jewish school, was co-ed. And they said, well, he didn't say anything. And he said, well, I didn't say anything, but the teacher told us not to say anything. But my daughter couldn't hold it.
Right.
So I said, this is very serious, because if they're infiltrating our schools, I said to my wife, we're going to be millionaires and we're going to lose our family. Yeah. So we called for an emergency meeting of the management of the school, and we decided that we couldn't get rid of that teacher because her husband happened to be a colonel. And since we had a revolution going on in the country, it wouldn't be good to do. Right. So that was when we decided we're going to leave, but we're not going to leave suddenly. It was 1969, I think. We're going to go slow. We're going to sell our business, because I didn't want to, lose everything. Yeah. So it took us from 1969 to 1974, 5 years. And during those 5 years, slowly, without making any noise, I was able to get rid of my assets, move them to the United States, and then in December of 1974, we left. Before we left, my 2 oldest sons graduated high school, so I sent them to the United States to learn English, and then they both went to the University of Miami. Then Eddie, whom you met, stayed at the University of Miami, and my other son was my first Gator. He went to the University of Florida.
It's a very, very wise way of dealing with the whole situation. Do you think your family's experience had taught you the necessity of planning and...
Well, it's more than taught me. I hope that they have learned from me.
Right.
I hope that they understand that, and I feel that they do, and I feel very, very happy and very lucky that my children are, they're not, they're family driven. Right now, my 5 sons and daughters live in a community where you can walk from one house to the other within 3 minutes.
That's nice.
And all 5 have homes in the same neighborhood. My grandchildren, who were also all born there, I have 18 grandchildren. They were all born in that community. They are not cousins. They are brothers and sisters. They commute with each other. And now they're getting married. Mm-hmm. And now I have 5 or 6 married. And they have brought in their husbands and wives into our community. And when we move around, 40 of us move around.
Oh, wow.
And I think this was the work that I did with my first wife, which unfortunately passed away very young, and my second wife, which you just met. Yes. We've been married now 26 years, has continued with the same way. She's also a single daughter. I mean, she has no brothers and sisters, just like me.
Right.
And she's become part of the family. She's as good as can be with my kids. They are, I hope, as good as they can be with her. And the family union has continued as well as it can be when you lose a young woman in life.
Yeah. Please, I'm sorry, I'm probably skipping forward again, but tell me your wife's name and how you met her.
My first wife?
Your second wife.
No, my second wife is called Monique.
Right.
Her forefathers, her father and herself were back then, and she's still a little bit into jewelry business.
Wonderful.
Mostly in diamonds. Now, I became a widower in March of 1989. And back then, and I haven't told you this yet, I was already working in a bank.
Right.
I was visited by a lot of prospective ladies that would be interested in meeting with me.
Right.
But most of them, younger than I, had little children. And my point of view was that I had 5, and I didn't want to have 6 or 7. And I did not pay much attention to the young ladies, or I don't want to say middle age, it's wrong, young ladies that had children.
Right.
A gentleman who worked with me at the bank one day came to see me and said, Alex, I have somebody I'd like you to meet. And I said, well, I've met all these people. He says, no. This is a woman who has a grown-up son. So that opened my eyes. And I said, okay. He gave me her number, and this was on a Friday, and I called Monique on the phone, and I introduced myself, and we had a very nice conversation, and I asked her to have dinner with me on Sunday. This was maybe late 1989, early 1990s. I don't remember the exact date. We went to dinner. I asked her to come to the movies with me on Monday. We went to the movies on Monday. We went to dinner on Monday, and the relationship started. We were married I better not make a mistake because she's listening to me right there. We were married in 1990. In June, I believe, June. I think it's 14th or something like that.
Right.
I may have made a mistake. And we've been married now for going on 26 years, and it's a good marriage. And like I said before, it was hard for her, being an only daughter, not having brothers or sisters, having a few relatives, not very many relatives living in Miami. She has relatives elsewhere in the United States, to jump into paradise, parachute.
Right.
Parachute into a family of, back then we were 25, 26, but it has worked. And we have a happy union.
That's wonderful.
Her son is part of our family. Her son is now 44, 45 years old, and he lives with us. He's single. And we're looking for a bride for him. If you know of anybody who's willing and able, he's an Orthodox Jew. He's the only Orthodox Jew in our family, but that's fine.
That's great.
We accept that, and he accepts us.
Right. Wonderful. Now, you mentioned the bank, and I know there's a whole story behind your working in the bank. So when you left Peru, you didn't continue with the tin cans and the fish meal, right?
Because I had 3 tin can manufacturing plants, we needed to import tin plate. Tin plate was not produced in Peru. Tin plate was produced in the United States primarily, and we also bought tin plate in France. So that required the necessity of opening letters of credit in order to import. So at the beginning, I didn't know very much about it, but over the years, I learned. Right. And between 1955, and when I left 1975, that's 20 years, right. I learned a lot about international business, letters of credit, transactions, foreign accounts, and so on. When we had a revolution in 1968, going back to the lessons I learned from my father, which I told you about my mother going to Switzerland, I thought that it was time for me to do the same. So I created a company in New York, and I took office space in the Ensley building in New York, and I convinced one of my cousins, a lady who lives in Miami now, to move to New York and work at my office, running my office for me, because I would go there maybe 5, 6, 7 times a year, but she was there permanently. She said yes. I sent her to a school in Lima to learn about business transactions for about 6 months, and then she moved to New York, and she was running the office. What was the office doing? Buying the tin plate that I selected in my trips to the United States, which was about every 2 months, and invoicing that same tin plate to the 3 manufacturing plants that I had in Lima at a profit. The profit being kept in the United States. Now, I had partners. I had partners in 2 out of 3 companies. My partners knew about this, and they were also beneficiaries of the profit that was being created, and the monies were put into their accounts and my account. So everything was up in the open, of course not for the government.
Right.
So we accumulated a certain amount of money that would help us when and if it was necessary. The decision that had been made as a result of that, my conversation with my daughter back then, moved on. We started thinking of selling the businesses, but we didn't want to sell them all at once, and we didn't want to make a lot of noise. Right. So that's why it took 5 years.
Right.
And as we sold the businesses, we moved some money out of the country also. And so when it was time that my 2 older sons graduated high school, and we also made the decision to keep them in school so as not to break up their high school education. When they both graduated, one before the other, because there's a year difference between them, we moved. Right. Now, why did we move to Miami?
Right.
Lima is in the summer is the same kind of weather that in Miami.
Right.
It's warm, it's nice, it's on the water. We were all water people.
Right.
We had a home, a summer home, in the northern part of Lima, about 40 kilometers north of Lima on the Pacific Ocean. And we would spend January, February, and March, which is the summer in the southern part of America, in that home. And we, like I say, we were water people. Right. My kids were brought up in the water and skiing and swimming and everything. Miami was conducive to the same. My wife and I knew Miami, and we decided that is the place for us. Right. And it was a good decision. So we moved to Miami, and because of my knowledge in international business created by the fact that I had to import a lot, right, I started a letter credit business on my own. It went well, but pretty soon I ran out of capital because I had to finance the importers, which basically were in Peru and Venezuela, and I had to pay for their imports in Japan or Europe and then wait 120 to 180 days for my recovery of the money through the letters of credit. Since I was successful, I ran out of money. So I couldn't take deposits because I had a private company. I wasn't licensed. So I decided that the solution was to buy into a bank so I could get credit. And I started looking for a bank to buy into. And I received a proposal for a gentleman who had emigrated from Cuba years before myself and had started a bank to come into partnership with him. And that's what I did. I transplanted my letter credit business into the bank and created what was then called the International Division of a bank called Capital Bank. Right. And I used the money that I had collected from all the transactions that I did to buy stock in the bank. And I became the second stockholder in the bank after Mr. Abel Holtz, who was the major stockholder of the bank. So I was running the international division of Capital Bank from 19 I don't want to make a mistake again, 1989 sometime, 1990 maybe. Yeah, 1989 until 1996 when we sold the bank. So that gave me the opportunity first to learn about bank business and then prosper in the banking business. When we sold it in 1996, I decided that it was time enough for me to retire. So, of course, during the years in Miami, while I was working on my own, and then more so when I was working in the bank, I got very much involved in the Jewish community of Miami, as I had been involved in the Jewish community in Lima. And I decided that that's what I want to do. So since 1996 through now, I have no business. My children have businesses. I don't have a business. And I do raise money and help in the Jewish community in Miami in 7 different organizations.
That's wonderful. You must be very busy with that sort of...
It keeps me busy, but it's interesting. It gives you a lot of, we say in Hebrew, we say nachis.
Right.
You know what that means.
Like pride, but
it
not
gives
quite.
You a lot of pride. And when I'm walking one side of the sidewalk and somebody else is walking the same side, they move to the other because they're afraid I'm going to hit them for some financial help.
Right. Have you transferred your entrepreneurial skills to this fundraising side? Do you think?
Did I transfer to them?
Yes. Has all your business skills, do they feed into this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Now, 3 of my kids, my son Daniel, who's the second one in the family, my daughter Jennifer, who's the third, and Ariela, who you met, who's the 5th, are following the stepfather's steps. Wonderful. Which makes me very happy. The others I'm not displeased with, but I would have liked them to be involved also, but they're not.
I'm amazed at your business skills, at all the thought and that you put into what you did and how your planning. But was it because the time was more conducive to being able to build businesses and innovate in the way that you did? Or
Well, I was not involved in any business that I created.
Right.
The first tinplate company that I was involved in was a company that had been shut down because of bankruptcy. And my father helped me financially to buy it out of bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. The second one I created by myself. The third one, which was the largest one, I became a partner in with other people who had been there before me. Right. So I didn't create that. The liquor manufacturing plant that I bought a couple of years before we left was also a company that I had another partner with, right, who was the original creator. So I can't take credit for having created any of those businesses. When I came to America and I started working on my letter of credit business, which lasted about 2 years, you could say that I created that. But then when I moved into the bank, I moved into a business that was created hundreds of years before banking started, and I was just one more, and I learned, and then after I learned, I let it grow. And we, like I say, we were the second largest international division banking in the United States, not in the United States of America, in the East Coast of the United States. And we were probably the smallest in banking as a whole, mm-hmm, but the largest in international business. Wow. And it was a nice business. It gave me opportunity to travel all over the world. I had an office in Hong Kong. I had an office in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I had an office in Lima. I had an office in San Salvador. I had an office in Buenos Aires. And you know, they were creating businesses with the local industry of local importers. So it was fun. And my wife traveled with me sometimes, and sometimes I had to go by myself. Right. And I got to know a lot of people that I would have not known. They got to know me. And like I say, in the Jewish community in Miami, which is a very prosperous and very, very strong Jewish community, I think I did well. Yeah.
I think I really admire your adaptability, your thinking on your feet. Do you think that was partly because of the immigrant experience, yes, partly because of diaspora?
Well, you know, unfortunately, we all had to go through that. Right. That's part of the Jewish experience in Europe. But I don't know. I really don't know whether it was something. I didn't learn it from my parents.
Right.
My parents were very busy making a living at the very beginning. Like I said, I was brought up by my grandmother, and I didn't learn any of that in school in Lima. I didn't learn any of that at the University of Colorado. It's just instinctively.
Instinctive. Incredible. What about your thoughts on identity? Because are you Austrian, Peruvian, American? What do you think about
according to my wife, who's sitting there across listening, right, I'm too much of a Peruvian. I like Peruvian food. Right. I like hot food. Yes. I like speaking Spanish more than I like speaking English with people that I know speak Spanish. Yes. I have a lot of friends in the Spanish American community. I created in 1980 the international division of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, which was based on Spanish immigrants like myself, and it had grown quite substantially. It's still active, very active. I don't feel anything for Austria.
Right.
I was 4 years or 4.5 years old when I left. I had no experiences there. I had no. When I read or I know a little bit about the Austrian history, I don't like it because the Anschluss was not good for the Jews. The Austrians do not like Jews even today. You take a taxi in Vienna and they hear you speak Yiddish or Hebrew or a foreign language, and they react that you're Jewish. They don't like you. No, I don't have any feeling for being an Austrian. I have the fact that I was born there. I took my wife when we went on a trip to the house where I lived. Last 2 years ago, I took my entire family on a river cruise on the Danube, and that stopped in Vienna, and I took them to see the house where I lived. I tell them stories about how my life was there as a little baby, but my main development was in Peru.
Right.
Now I've been in Miami 42 years, more than half my life.
Right.
But I still feel that I'm Peruvian.
Peruvian. And do you go back there regularly?
I used to go back very often. My deceased wife was one of 8 children. And as they have unfortunately passed away over the years, there was less reason for me to go back.
Right.
When my wife passed away in 1989, the only surviving sister is one who lives there now, and for a while there was a survivor brother and my mother-in-law.
Right.
Both my mother-in-law and the surviving brother also passed away, so I haven't had an opportunity to go back, although a lot of my friends of my same age still live there, and unfortunately some of them are no longer. And based on your question, as a matter of fact, I have plans to go on the 19th of April to Peru, to Lima,
right.
after having not being there for 12 years.
Wow. Could be interesting to see
I'm
what's
going for
changed.
3 or 4 days.
Wonderful.
One of my friends, a lady, is turning 80. They're giving her a surprise party.
Wonderful.
And I hope to see some of my remaining friends before we all fly away to someplace else.
What's the Jewish community like there today?
Then we were about 10,000
Right,
Jews.
right.
Today, if we're lucky, there's less than 2,000.
2,000.
Most of them emigrated as a result of what happened.
Right.
A lot of them, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because at the time they emigrated it was not bad, went to Venezuela. They established businesses in Venezuela. Their children were born in Venezuela. They were doing very well. And now,
There's a lot of
it's common
anti-Semitism.
knowledge that they are now in Miami.
Right.
The largest congregation of Latin American foreigner Jews in Miami are Venezuelans.
That's very interesting.
And we have a lot of Argentinians who went through the same problem, and so on and so forth. I mean, all of us who are there came there for a political reason which we're not part of.
Right.
We never got involved into that.
Yep.
But we suffered.
Right.
But we're not complaining.
That's good. What are your hopes and fears for your children and grandchildren? Do you have a message that you want to impart?
The main message I have is that I keep my family as tight together as I can. We get together every Friday night for Shabbat. We rotate among the 6 families. We get together for the Jewish holidays. Some of us go to the same synagogue, and that's the religious part of it.
Right.
The non-religious part of it is we celebrate birthdays. We go on trips together. We go skiing in the winter. We go to a place up here in North Florida called Port St. Lucie during the spring. We go some places in the summer. They, of course, over the years and because of their marriages, have now acquired different families. I mean, the family grows beyond our control.
Right.
And but they still have been able to not only bring into our family their spouses, but also some of the spouses' parents, which participate. And now we're in the generation of the great-granddaughters. We have a great-granddaughter who's 6 months old. We have a great-granddaughter or great-grandson, I don't know which, who's going to be born at the end of April, beginning of May. We have six granddaughters and grandsons married, which we hope they'll produce soon. I encourage the production. And we are a fairly united family, but each one of them have their own needs, have their own lives, have their own families with their in-laws and friends and such. And, we're part of the community.
I think it's a great testament to the survival of the Jewish community. And
we try to be there.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I've asked you everything I wanted to ask you. There's so many questions. Other points that we didn't cover? Something you might want to add yourself?
Sorry?
Is there something in your story that maybe I didn't touch upon that you would want to make sure we covered?
No, I think I've told you most of it. I mean, I can't remember anything of any...
I guess I suppose we could, we didn't talk too much. You told me that all your support and work for the Jewish community of Florida, but perhaps not about how you've seen it grow over time.
Well, like I say, I can only talk to you about Miami because that's where we live and that's where we are known. The growth of the Jewish community in Miami is basically Latin American.
Latin America, very interesting.
When we came from Peru, we were not very many, maybe 100 families. Mm-hmm. Right after we came, the situation in Argentina got very bad, and we may have today maybe 300 to 400 Jewish, originally Argentinian families who also have American children.
Right.
And then, of course, the Venezuelan situation now. And but the Anglo community has not grown. It has shrunk because Miami used to be a place where the American Jews would come to spend the winter, and some of them stayed on.
Right.
They still do. We call them the snowbirds. But the young ones are not coming anymore.
Right. Because
they have other needs, other possibilities in their place of origin where they live. And fortunately, so far, we the Jews are not discriminated against wherever we are in the country, although it's not as good as it was.
Right.
And we're very concerned about the future. But we work hard on it. We have a lot of national institutions like AIPAC or the American Jewish Committee or others that are there to protect our Jewish entity, which weren't available during the Second World War, otherwise we wouldn't have had all those losses. But I can tell you that in the 40 years in Miami, the growth of the Jewish community has been basically, in my opinion, Latin American.
Very interesting. I think we've probably come to the end of our questions.
Well, it's been a pleasure
wonderful
talking to you. I hope it is for any good purpose.
It is. We're collecting such stories such as yours, people who have made a difference to the growth of the state of Florida, Jewish people who can tell us about their lives in Latin America and then coming over to America, the immigrant story. You've captured all of that in your story, and
Thank you very much.
It's very important to our collection. Thank you.
I thank you, and once you edit, well, I shouldn't say edit because you're not going to cut anything out, are you? Because I had many interviews in the past where I remember what I said and
right.
Where is it? It doesn't show anymore. What do they do with it?
Right.
That you send us a copy so I can show it to the rest of our family.
Yes, we will definitely do that.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much.